All righty now. All right. So may peace and power and elevation be to all you beautiful people out there. And this is your girl Tiffany coming through live in effect right here on the StreamYard. So if you're watching from my YouTube channel, please make sure you go ahead share and subscribe to the channel. If you are watching from Facebook, go ahead and share the video on Facebook. All right. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell when I come on YouTube. And also, if you want to support what I'm doing, um, I go into doing a lot of research or taking time out doing this information stuff. Please go ahead and do so. That's my Cash App information. If you want to support me, just because you want to show some support or just show your appreciation or things like that, you can go ahead and do that. That's the Cash App information at the bottom. So today, I want to get into the topic, right? That many of us, subconsciously speaking, we deal with, but we not very in depth into. Like, we're not into, we don't go into detail a lot about this topic. So that will be dealing with Africana philosophy. All right. That's what I want to get into. So yeah, it's going to be broken down in 3 parts so it's going to be Africana philosophy / psychology. So, but today I'm just going to deal with the Africana philosophy. Okay. And then part 2 will go into more detail about Africana philosophy. There's the difference between Africana and the African philosophy. And then part 3, I'll be dealing with the Africana psychology. So yes, it's a very broad topic. And with that being said, I would have to break it down into like 3 parts because it's going to be very time consuming to do all this. So let's go ahead and get started. So what I want to do is, I want to, before I even go into what Africana philosophy is, let's look at what philosophy is for one. So I have a book here, which is called The Big Book of Philosophy. If you guys can see me holding it up. All right. Hold on. All right. It's called Big Book of Philosophy. It's written by Naomi Zach. All right. So when we talk about philosophy, just break it down. The word philosophy has a Greek term. So philo means love. Sophie means wisdom. So it means the love of wisdom. But according to this book, and now let's look at the basics of what philosophy is. What is philosophy? Philosophy is the activity of seeking wisdom. In Greek, which was the first language of Western philosophy, philosophy means love of wisdom. One loves wisdom by trying to figure out what it is. There are many ways human beings seek wisdom, including art, religion, and lived experience. Philosophy is distinct because it seeks wisdom through the systematic use of reason. Philosophers focus on ideas, the meaning of ideas, and beliefs by analyzing them. They break them down into their parts and then build them back up again and combine them in new ways. In addition to analysis, philosophers reflect on what goes on in the mind of philosopher reflects what goes on in the mind and the world. They seek wisdom through institutions of whole structures of thought or experience. So basically, when we deal with philosophy, we understand it from experience. That's how philosophy is based off. It's based off of experience and based off of interpretation. All right. So, and which in turn builds social constructs and ideology and cultural values. So remember, everything goes back to the philosophical standpoint. Just like America is built off of Roman Greco ideology. Okay. That's what it's mainly built off of. So a lot of the stuff that we do here in America, it comes from the Roman Greco ideology. It started off as philosophy. Then you had the men that came along, like I think Adam Smith, he came along with what we know today as democracy. So all these things were philosophical. Right? All these things were ideas. All these things were interpretation. You know, someone's viewpoint of what the world should be. And then eventually it became a social construct. It became a cultural construct. So let's go ahead and let's look into Africana philosophy. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and show you my screen. Now, many may wonder, well, why does she use Wikipedia or WikiOne or any of those websites? Because, and I'm not saying that Wikipedia is 100% reliable all the time, but most of the time you may find some good information on Wikipedia, and then you'll be able to find references and external links as well. So with that being said, Wikipedia is much easier because it breaks things down in a more simple way. You know, it makes you be able to understand things a little bit more clear. So it's easy to be able to go and find definitions of words. So everybody else, you know, they always want to use Wikipedia to support other ideologies, right? So why not go to Wikipedia to look up other valuable information? Now, you always want to do double check and you want to go back and verify stuff that you find on Wikipedia, you know. And if you notice that when I do like the videos, I always make sure I have other sources besides Wikipedia to go back and verify and to double check to make sure that it's aligned and it makes a lot, you know, it's cordial and everything is in place like it's supposed to, you know. So that's one of the reasons why I use Wikipedia. Is a lot easier to be able to, you know, break down the definition, break down the subject matter and things of that nature. And you will more than likely find a lot of references just looking at the bottom of the screen, you know, when you scroll down. But let's go ahead. All right. So Africana philosophy. Now, what is Africana philosophy? Africana philosophy is the work of philosophers of African descent and others who work deals with the subject matter of the African diaspora. Now, when we talk about the African diaspora, we're talking about the people that's in the African descendant people of North America, South America, Latin, and the Caribbean, and also in Canada, Great Britain, all of that. So those are African descendant people that lives outside of the continent, or that's, you know, in the you know, in other continents or other regions, especially here in the Americas and the Caribbean and Britain. So, and then it also goes in Africana philosophy includes the philosophical ideas, arguments, and theories of particular concern to people of African descent. Some of the topics explored by Africana philosophy include pre-Socratic African philosophy and modern day debates discussing the early history of Western philosophy, post-colonial writing, and Africa and the Americas, Black resistance to oppression, Black existentialism in the United States, and the meaning of Blackness in the modern world. It says Lucius Outlaw writes, Africana philosophy is very much a heuristic notion that is one that suggests orientation for philosophical endeavors by professional philosophers and other intellectuals devoted to matters pertinent to African and African descendant persons and peoples. Professional philosophers in the area of ethics, social philosophy, all right, political philosophy, philosophy of biology, semantics, critical race theory, and post-colonialism are currently exploring Africana philosophy. The American Philosophical Association has 10,000 members in North America. It is estimated that only 100 of its members in North America are of African descent. And then Lewis Gordon writes, Africana philosophy is a species of Africana thought, which involves the theoretical questions raised by critical engagements with ideas in Africana's cultures and their hybrid, mixed, and creolized form worldwide. Since there was no reason for the people of the African continent to have considered themselves African until that identity was imposed upon them through conquest of colonization in modern era. This area of thought also referred to the unique set of questions raised by the emergence of Africans and their diaspora, here designed by the term Africana. Africana philosophy referred to the philosophical dimension of this area of thought. So, to all sum it up, right, Africana philosophy deals with the philosophical point of view of those who are African descended and their interpretation of the world, and also their experience, especially considering race in the Western society. So why is this so prevalent to talk about? Because this is what we deal with on a consistent basis. We deal with this all the time and we don't know it. We don't know that we are very philosophical people. Many of us don't know about psychology. Right, we don't, this is not a regular conversation you have. You don't just regularly talk about philosophy or psychology. And people always say that, well, you need to stop talking about race. Race should not always be discussed in the conversation. Well, guess what? If you're going to tell somebody, and I hate that with a passion, that you tell somebody that is Black not to talk about race, especially when they have to deal with a society that's built on that construct. So race is always going to be a topic of discussion, no matter what, because it's built on a social construct. So to tell somebody to quit talking about race, it's like to tell somebody to quit talking about their problems. You can't tell somebody not to discuss their problems or their issues when the issue is ongoing. You can't do that. So yes, race is very prevalent to this philosophical study. It's very prevalent. And it's not just dealing with race, it's also dealing with culture. It's dealing with the cultural standpoint. So now, let's look at more in details about Africana philosophy. All right, so right here I'm on Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Oh, and I'm gonna read to you guys real quick. So right here at the top it says Africana philosophy. Okay, it comes from Plato, Stanford.edu, and it was first published on October 11th of 2010. Substantive revision May 23rd of 2017. And right here, I'm gonna highlight this paragraph. It says African philosophy is the name for an emergence and still developing fields of ideas and idea space, intellectual endeavors, discourses, and discursive networks within and beyond academic philosophy that was recognized as such by national and international organization of professional philosophers, including the American Philosophical Association starting in the 1980s. Thus, the name does not refer to a particular philosophy, philosophical system, method, or tradition. Rather, Africana philosophy is a third order was a meta-philosophical umbrella concept used to bring organizing oversight to various efforts of philosophizing. That is, activities of reflective, critical thinking, articulation, aesthetic expression, engaged by persons and people African and of African descent who were and are indigenous residents of continental African and residents of the many African diasporas worldwide. In all cases, the point of much of the philosophizing has been to convert meaningful orderings on individual and sharing living and on natural and social worlds while resolving recurrent, emergent, and radically disputive challenges to existence so as to survive, endure, and flourish across successive generations. Now, in my opinion, in my opinion, I think that philosophy should be considered as social science. I think that it should be considered as social science because it's that it's like the home base of social science. It's the home base. So I think that it should fall under that category. So out of philosophy, you have psychology follow with that. Then you have the sociology that deals with social interaction, social groups, and then you have anthropology, which deals with the cultural aspect of humanity. So philosophy gave birth to all these different branches that we know as social science. And you have to realize without philosophy, you can't have social groups, right? You will not be able to study mental behaviors, right? And then you will not be able to have a culture. So you wouldn't have anthropology. And every group and every ethnic group out there from different countries, they all had their own philosophies. They all had their own ideologies. It's part of the human mind. It's part of the human behavior. That's a part of us. We all gonna have philosophy. Hell, our parents had their own philosophical way of thinking. Our grandparents had their own philosophy about things. That's just the human in us. So when we deal with somebody that comes from another background that's different from ours, we got to understand that it's not just a cultural thing, it's a philosophy thing as well. Even those in the African in Africa, right? They each had their own philosophy. Various tribes had different way of seeing things or viewing life. Different tribes had their own customs. Everybody didn't practice the same custom. This is where ethnoscience come in, and that's a whole nother subject that I'll deal with later. Yeah, but this is where ethnoscience come into play, because ethnoscience is dealing with science based on cultural practices. That's all it is. So, because of our experience here in America as Black people, this is what prompted us into studying about psychology and sociology, anthropology, and philosophy. This would prompt us to write about our issues and, use it as an educational form to teach others, to educate those that will follow us and that will come after us, so that way they will know and they will become aware of the issues and the crisis. It will not be a big surprise to them. It will be a preparation for them to learn how to deal with other groups of people and the narratives, especially living in the United States. Then they'll be able to say, you know what? I remember somebody was saying this, or I remember that person was writing about this. And this is what this person was speaking of. This is what the person meant. Because now they have a clear conscience of the world around them and the government which they are falling under and the social ideas. But let me go ahead and continue. All right. So real fast. Let me go ahead and read this part right here. It says, the concept of Africana philosophy. There are significant challenges to the viability of the concept of Africana philosophy, as well as to an effort to map out an encyclopedic overview of the extended and still expanding range of endeavors covered by the term. Foremost are the challenges to ordering through a single concept the geographical, historical, social, political, and cultural differences and complexities that have been defined and continue to define the realities of life of the many persons and people identified as African and of African descent. And many locals throughout the world, yet the viability of the concept is grounded on several centuries of continuous, linked, complicated histories during which Black people of Africa and their descendants have been regarded as and engaged with. Give me a second, you guys. Okay, I'm back. I had a little technical issue. I had to make sure that everything was good. All right, so going back to what I was saying, what was I reading? Okay, so it said the long history of this regarding by others and by themselves does have conditioned substantially the history making, the social political lives, the cultural makings, and cultural mediation, intellectual production, and philosophizing included of persons and people's African descent. Then it goes on down here. On these socially constructive historical groundings rest several key heuristic presumptions that are central to Africana philosophy as a meta philosophical concept for organizing intellectual priorities. First, the presumption that there are sufficient distinguishing anthropological, historical, and other commodities and similarities that are shared more and or less by the many biocultural groupings of human beings who have been identified and who subsequently generally have come to identify themselves as part African or of African descent. To warrant ordering under a general heading particular instance of philosophically articulated through expressed by persons in these groups and shared with and debated by others within and beyond the groupings. These identifications are consequences of the imposition on the peoples of the continent named Africa of an attempted homogenizing, racializing ontology by peoples of nation states on another continent that was named Europe. In an aspiration for geopolitical and anthropological unification, many Europeans came to believe that beneath their many formidable differences, there was a foundational commodity through shared raciality and other constructive virtues that was definitive of their anthropological and historical superiority as harbingers of a theologically and philosophically sanctioned destiny to achieve global predominance. It was out of this toxic mix of conviction and aspiration that particular Europeans set about constructing racialized, ranked order, philosophical anthropologies through which they construed a continent of diverse peoples as a single race single race of Africans or Negroes. The outcomes of the histories of these inventive forgings through complex centuries-long struggles against European imperialism and positions and the adaptive endurance of colonization, dispersing enslavements by persons and peoples African and African descended provide the warrant for the presumption of commodities embraced by the concept of Africana philosophy when considering the philosophizing of people African and African descended subsequent to their encounters with impositions of imperialism by peoples of Europe and European diaspora. All right, so basically it's to pretty much break down the difference between how we think and how we interpret things versus how the Europeans have interpreted things. And I've said this plenty of time. By us being in America for the past 500 years, we have become accustomed and we have assimilated into the Western culture. We have taken on the ideology and the beliefs of those in the Western culture. So what we try to do is, for many of us, for some of us, we try to reconnect back to those African roots and try to infuse it within the Western culture, which that created the concept of Afrocentrism. All right. And so I'm going to talk about Afrocentrism on a part 2. But yeah, that's what created that, because we wanted to be able to connect back to those roots that we have lost. And when I say we have lost, that means that it was forgotten, or it was not celebrated as much. It was not commemorated. So that's why you see a lot of African Americans, Negroes, they don't even know who they are. They don't know anything about their culture because they have been so used and so accustomed to this society. And then you have those who try to what they do, what is called cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation is being a culture vulture, meaning taking on somebody else's culture and claiming it as yours. All right, so that's very common. Okay, so let me give you a prime example to help understand philosophy. When we look at the conscious community, right, many of us are familiar with the conscious woke community. Now, the woke community is a beginning stage of awareness. When I say beginning stage of awareness, it's to give you some sense of idea of becoming enlightened and start learning how to think for yourself, right? That's when you should be able to take that advantage to be able to branch off and do your research and to elevate yourself. So it's a beginning point. It's a rudimentary level of consciousness. Do you understand what I'm saying? Rudimentary level of consciousness. Meaning that it's just the basic level. But what you have and what happened is you have so many people that stuck on that basic and they don't try to advance themselves. So they take the basic and they just keep it as it is and they just believe that that's just all to it. And it's like, no, there is more to it. That's why even Bobby Hemmett said to himself, he said, 20 years from now, my information will become rudimentary. My information will become rudimentary. So somebody else can come along and find out more information, right? And my stuff will be considered as outdated. It will be no longer in use. And he does have a point. It's just a beginning letter. It's just basic. It's limited information. That's why when you look at the word hypothesis, what does the word hypo mean? Hypo means limited, below. So hypothesis is just limited information dealing with the subjective, right? And it has not yet been falsified, meaning that it has not been proven to be debunked, right? Because it has not gone through the experimental process. And it has not gone through the extensive research. So that means that it's based on the subjectivity of that individual or their limit interpretation or their limit understanding of a particular subject matter. So they would have to go beyond their limited understanding to actually find out more to be able to challenge their source or challenge their knowledge or to be able to debunk their knowledge, find something that will go against it and find something that will be able to approve it, etc. So, I dropped my water bottle. Excuse me. But so yeah, you have to go beyond to actually go outside your limitation. And so philosophy is a good thing for many of us. It's very good to deal with philosophy because that's what opens your mind and that would makes you become more aware and become more thoughtful. And it make you want to do more research into actually studying the world and how the world seems to operate. See, the world operates on social constructs, cultural ideas, philosophy. That's how the world operates. But I use the conscious community as an example because many of us are familiar with that. Many of us have came across other black folks, and you come across other black folks who come from different schools of thoughts, right? Who come from different backgrounds, who come from the Hebrew background, the Moorish background, the Nuwapian background, the Kemetic background, Rasta, Pan-Africanism. You come across that, and those information that you hear, it could be outdated information, debunked, or what we like to call pseudo. But you also know that they just dealing with their own philosophical ideas based on what has been taught. And see, this creates what is called sociocentrism, social psychology. So it creates sociocentrism because you find groups of individuals that are like-minded, right? And because they are like-minded, they gonna connect with each other. Then in social psychology, right, you might see that, okay, you got this one big old group of black folks, but because of this group of black people, you got another set of group of black people over here that deals with this. That group of set of black people deal with that, and then that group of set of black people deal with this over here, and then from that group, the individuals over here have this mindset, and then that individual have their mindset, and then that individual. So you dissecting, you constantly dissecting things. Again, we'll deal with social psychology when we get onto the psychology level. But you have to understand, you able to dissect not only just a group of people, but a subgroup of people, and then the individuals. So yeah, there is always that subgroup within that large group. And that subgroup has their own philosophy that may be different from the main group. But let me go ahead and skip on down in this article. All right, so All right, so let's look at the presumption real quick. Okay, so it says this first presumption is tempered by a second, namely that the cultural groupings of people African and of African descent are not homogeneous racially or otherwise, neither individually nor collectively, but are constituted by differences and dissimilarities as well as by similarity and commodities. All right. Then we're going to skip on down further. It says furthermore, identified shared similarity and commodities are understood to be contingent, thus neither necessary nor inherent and fixed, and thus the same for all persons, African or African descendant. Okay, this presumption rules out any historical priori claims regarding supposedly definitive natural characteristics of the thought of African and African descendant peoples, assumed as non-contentiously, widely, and generally shared across extended historical times and cultural spaces. All right. And so let's go ahead and skip down to the third presumption. Africana philosophy should not be regarded as normative, prescriptive for philosophers identified as African or African descent, as setting requirements for what their philosophizing must have been or must be about, and to what ends because of their racial ethnic identities. Such identities neither confer nor require particular philosophical commitments or obligations. Substantive differences among African and African descendant thinkers have been and must continue to be acknowledged and taken into account in the order of the fields and setting agendas for Africana philosophy. There have been, are, and will likely continue to be persons African and of African descent for whom their identities as such are no import for philosophizing. All right. Um. So, all right. So that's the information on Africana philosophy. So if you want to look up more information about that, you can just look up Plato.stanford.edu. So Plato.stanford.edu, and just look up Africana philosophy. Okay, so it's a lot of information. That let's look at bibliography. So here's the bibliography right here with the sources that was used. All right. All right. So let's go ahead and go to the next source. Um, Now the next source deals with Africana existential phenomenology. Okay, so this source is called Taking Africana Extensional Philosophy of Education Seriously. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate that so much. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you. Let's keep it coming. Let's keep it coming. Let's keep it coming with those subscribers. You know, just make sure if you're watching from the channel, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thank you. All right. So here it is. Let's look at what it says defining Africana instinctualism or instinctional philosophy. All right. So down here it says, but what is an Africana oriented or extensional phenomenology, and how would it be Africana extensional phenomenology that consistence of anti-Africana overcome anti-black racism in a very real sense. Africana existential phenomenology is always already a creolized philosophical discourse. It cannot help but to examine the lived experiences of Africana persons through the lens of certain concepts lifted from Europeanized philosophy and transformed in such a manner that they disclose the giveness of Africana lived experiences as just that. The lived experiences of persons who happen to have been racialized many centuries ago at the dawn of Western and Central European modernity. All right, give me 1 second, you guys. Okay. So and then it goes down here and say, how does givenness of the lived experience of Africana person disclose itself to an Africana phenomenologist? The transcendental reduction that is performed by an African or Africana phenomenologist is one that is was it compatible with, if somewhat different from. Herzlian phenomenology. This means that rather than suspending all existential judgments about the world to clear a space for investigating how we constitute the meaningfulness of the phenomena we experience. Practitioner of Africana of phenom, phenomenology envision the phenomenological reduction as a mean of bracketing the reality of racial categories. Once the mundane existence of these racial categories is put in abeyance, one can then investigate how these racial categories are constituted by examining the lived experiences of Africana persons. Questioning the reality of racial categories does not mean they are unreal. However, what it does mean is that they are not universal features of the human conditions. Instead, they are significant social cultural concepts that have partially determined what it means to be human for several centuries in many Western and Westernized society. This insight into the thoroughly historical nature of racial categories allows Africana exist as an existential phenomenologist to see the world as a racialized one. And having the racial dimensions of our social world disclose themselves allows Africana existential phenomenologists to appreciate how differences between Africana persons, differences in ethnicity, socioeconomic status, level of formal education, religious affiliation, personal interests, and so on are eliminated for the convenience of Europeans and those of European descent. All right, so then I'm gonna read a little part right here where it says Africana is existential phenomenology. I'll say phenomenology also presupposes the possibility of us performing ego displacement techniques. One can think of ego displacement as what occurs once one suspends one existential judgments about the world. In the case of racial identities, by distancing ourselves from supposed super presuppos what is that word? What is it? Where's that word at? Hold on, you guys. Presupposition, presuppositions of an anti-black world. We have a chance to examine how such a world is co-constituted by us. We are able to examine how we critically take up the already existing racial landscapes for ourselves and for others. We places us in a position where we can acknowledge our complicity in perpetuating a world that dehumanizes people due to their racial identities. This is not limiting to racial identity. However, it can include socioeconomic status, ethnicity, national origin, religious affiliation, and any other social cultural marker that societies can attach to someone. For the purpose of this essay, we will restrict our discussion to racial identity, more specifically Black racial identity. All right. So that term, was it phenomenology? Let's look up what that term phenomenology is. Just for my purpose. Because there we go. All right. So the term phenomenology is the science of the phenomena as distinct from that of the nature of being, an approach that concentrates on the study of conscious and the objects of direct experiences. Let's see what was the best description, right? Okay, so going back to the previous website that I was on earlier, plato.stanford.edu. All right, so phenomenology is the study of structure of consciousness as experienced from the first person point of view. The central structure of experience is international or intentionality is being directed towards something as it is an experience of or about some object. Okay. An experience is directed towards an object by virtue of its content or meaning, which represent the object together with appropriation enabling condition. So that term on phenomenology is similar to basically philosophy and psychology. So it's like philosophy and psychology put together. That's what phenomenology is. That's my own understanding of it. This term is relatively new to me, so I had to go and look that term up because that's relatively new. All right, but anyways, let's go ahead and get back to the topic. Okay, it says phenomenologically viewing being black in an anti-black world. Ooh. Okay, so let's go down real quick. Okay, it says Fanon articulates this phenomenon concisely in the wretched of the earth because it is a systematic negation of the other, an unreasonable decision to refuse to the other all the attributes of humanity. Colonialism forces the people it dominates to ask themselves the question constantly, in reality, who am I? Fanon's description of colonialism in generally is equally applicable to anti-black racism because anti-black racism demands that black persons ask themselves the same question. Moreover, in an anti-black society, black persons often find themselves asking questions related to Fanon's questions. Employer hired me because I am qualified or because my employer sought to satisfy EEOC requirements. Ooh, that's a challenging question right there. Now, that is a good question, and that's a challenging question. Did my employer hire me because I am qualified or because of the EEOC requirements? Now, where I stand on that position, I personally believe that a lot of people get hired based on the EEOC requirements, not so much of the qualification. That's just me. Because you can tell by the attitudes of certain people in higher positions who they want to hire, who they don't want to hire, or who they want to keep on the job and who they don't want to keep. So let's talk about it real quick. Can racism still be practiced in the workplace? Yes, it can. However, it would not be done in the sense of direct, but it would be indirect. So, like, for example, in some states, they do what is called the right to work. The right to work state means that the employer has the right to fire you at any given time. And most states don't offer unions. So most states don't have unions. So that means if you're looking for a union, either that company that you work for either have to have their own union, or if that company does not have their own union, then guess what? That means that you're going to have to fight to get a union inside of that company, inside that job. So with that point that I'm about to make is, when you can practice, a person can practice racism, but they cannot be direct with it. They can get away with practicing racism, but they just can't be direct. They can't tell you, oh, I'm going to fire you because of the color of your skin. I'm going to fire you because we don't need a whole bunch of black people up in here. They can't say it like that. However, it's going to be coming up with excuse is, oh, we got to lay off some people. Or because we have too many people on board, we don't have enough money to pay everybody. I'm just being I'm just playing a scenario. Say that you are overqualified, or you are underqualified, because let's see, or they can just simply say, it was nice to have you here, but we're gonna have to let you go. So people don't know that employers can do that. They can fire you at any given time. So you are an employee at will. Especially if you are African American, you are an employee at will. You're more than likely going to get fired. Last one hired, first one to be fired. I know you guys heard that term before, right? But yeah, that's a good question. That is a very intellectual question and a challenging question at that. Go down. It says, and did I qualify into graduate school because I am, did I get into graduate school because I am qualified, or because their efforts to recruit minority students to their universities? These questions haunt many Black persons because anti-Black racism has a way of lessening the dignity of Black persons, even those persons who have stellar qualifications and experience, by having them second guess their qualification and expertise, while white mediocrity is excused and tolerated. That's very common. That's very common. So it says, unfortunately, Black persons in anti-Black world are not only required to justify their existence, but also to justify their existence given that they are supposedly a problem people. Williams Bennett's infamous thought experience in 2005 is a example of portraying African Americans as a problem people. In his thought experience, Bennett proposed, for the sake of argument, that if you wanted to reduce crime, you could. If that were your sole purpose, you could abort every Black baby in this country and your crime rate would go down. To his credit, he immediately said that doing so would be impossible, ridiculous, and morally reprehensible. Hence, we can't agree with columnist Eugene Robinson that Bennett did not intentionally advocate the genocidal extermination of African American children in the womb. But on the low key, he did. But what led Bennett to propose such a thought experiment in the first place? Bennett explained that he was responding to Stephen Levitt's Freakonomics, where Levitt argues that the steep drop in crime in the United States over the past 15 years resulted in part from the Roe versus Wade decision legalizing abortion. Robinson summarized Levitt's position on this issue in these words. Levitt's thesis is essentially the unwanted children who grow up poor in single-parent household are more likely than any other children to become criminals, and that Roe versus Wade result in fewer of these children being born. What he doesn't do in the book is single out Black children. Ooh, this get interesting. It says, this does not explain why Bennett associated criminality with African Americans. However, is examining Bennett's gaffe through the theoretical lens of Africana exists as existential philosophy does. Indeed, Africana as existential philosophy allow us to explain why Burnett associated criminality with African American in his argument against Levette's position this way. Burnett has accepted the racist stereotype that African Americans are inherently criminals to such an extent that he did not realize that one of the central premises in his argument presupposed the criminality of African Americans. You know what? Let me make a comment on that. So you gotta love it, right? I like this article because I like that the article exposed how other people thought of us. And I will expound on that little section right there. So an individual, right, had argued that, Roe versus Wade, giving more opportunity to people to have fewer babies so that way it could lessen the crimes. So to believe that to believe that more and more people should have an abortion, that you can worry less about crime taking place, especially within the inner city. To me, that is very discriminating. And that is a racist undertone. That's a racist undertone to show that this is the reality. So on the low key, individuals approve abortions just so it can help reduce the crime, not because it's the woman's right to choose. It's the woman's right to choose what she want to do with her body. No, it's because they figure, well, hey, if we encourage more and more women to have abortion, then we won't have to worry about more criminals being born. And when we're talking about criminals, in this case, it's associated to the racial narrative of who? African Americans. Because African Americans automatically going to be labeled, especially the males, African American men, are going to be labeled as criminals because they come from the inner city community. But let's not forget the fact about all the other groups out there, especially when we talk about the massacres that's taking place, right? Most of them are committed by who? White men. They're the main ones going to these schools, going to movie theaters, to the malls, and creating a massacre or mayhem. But because you see more of us on the news, and you hear about us when it comes to the crimes such as robbery, burglary, homicide, murders, etc., we're automatically put on that face. And then you got people like this that will come along and say such a thing like pretty much abortion will help reduce the population, which will reduce the amount of criminals. And that was the wrong ideology. So that was a misconception on that person's part to believe that. Because either way it goes, even if the woman had 1,000 abortions, right, crime's still going to exist. Crime will still exist. Hello? Knock on wood. Crime will still exist. That doesn't do anything. Because while you're living in a country that's built on the principle of violence, that's built on the principle of racism, that's built on the principle of capitalism. But anyways, and then get interesting right here. Yet the perception of Black as a problem people extend beyond unintentional anti-European American racist. This perception is held by many black persons towards blacks of lesser socioeconomic status. Indeed, there are many black people who interpret the behavior of other black persons through the lens of preconceived racist stereotype, such as that black men are criminals and black women are sexually promiscuous and welfare queens. The view that black persons are a problem people even affects so much of the U.S. National media coverage of African Americans. One of the most recent high profile examples of this phenomenon is coverage of Hurricane Katrina and its aftermath in New Orleans. During the aftermath of Katrina, when many of those left behind went into abandoned grocery stores in search of food, many photographs were taken of them. There were two photographs taken that, if juxtaposed, show how African Americans are depicted as problem people. The first photograph circulated by the Association Press showed an African American man wading through the flood, toting a bag and a case of cola. A young man reading the caption walks through chest deep flood water after looting a grocery store. The second photograph, taken for GD Images, showed a white couple also wading through water and toting a bag and backpacks. All right, so it says two residents. The caption read, "The wades through chest deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store." The caption for African American photograph makes sense given the common assumption in American society that African Americans, especially young African American men, are criminals. This in turn reinforces the view of African Americans as problem people. This is especially true when we compare the African American photograph to Euro American couples. Unlike the young African American man, the couple was not seen through the prism of criminality. Instead, their act of theft was deemed acceptable due to emergency circumstances. Indeed, their act was not seen as being criminal at all. But you know what's so ironic, right? And you know what? The name of this article is called "Taking Africana Existential Philosophy of Education Seriously," written by Dwayne A. Turnstile, Grand Valley State University. So you can look it up on the files.ericed.gov. Just look on that website and look on the just type in the title right here. You can type in this title and you can just look up more information for yourself. So, but you know what? Let's speak on this real quick. America has produced what we call criminals. Okay? You have produced what others may deem as savages, as delinquents. As belligerent people. These people have been produced. They have been produced. So it's not something that they wake up one morning and say, "Hey, I'm going to be a criminal because of it, and I think it's fun to do criminal activity." No, people don't just wake up subconsciously and just say, "I'm going to be a criminal for the sake of it." There's Now, unless they're psychotic like that and they have premeditated thoughts and they call themselves trying to experiment, then that's different. But these toxic attitudes come into place because of their social environment, because of how they've been nurtured, and what brought the influence on them. So that's why I don't agree with the concept of natural born killers. Because, for one, how are you a natural born killer when you don't even know how to be a killer? In order to learn how to be a killer, you will have to be nurtured into that. You will have to be trained into that, right? You will have to learn techniques and ways of doing that. You will have to be experimental. So how can a person be a natural born killer if they have not gone through the experimental process of being one? So it all goes back to nurturing. This is what America has produced. The same people that America complained about being criminals, you produced them. This society made these group of people. And we still carry on the slave mentality, the ideology that has been perpetuated from slavery. It's still being passed to us. No, we may not be in chattel slavery. No, we may not be on the boats anymore. No, we may not be out there picking on crops. But guess what? The mentality is there because we pass it on down to one another. So white supremacy has done its work. And it has done its work through the minds of the people. And even the people that try to get out of this Western way of thinking, they can't get out of it. Many of us get out of the Western philosophy and our Western psychology. We can't get away from that because it has been ingrained. It has been domesticated in our psyche. So there's no way for us to get away from it. We can change up the narrative, but we can't get away from it. So human influence other humans. Remember that. Human influence humans. Zaza Ali says it the best. What did Zaza Ali say? She said that humans are ecology. No, she said humans are ecosystem. And she was right. Humans are ecosystem. So you got this group of human beings, right? Especially those who have used their skin tone as a privilege. And they are the center front of society. And guess what? Those people are identifying with themselves based on those group of people. And then that group of people have extended their powers to other groups. So human influence other humans. Human extend powers onto other humans. Oh boy. Okay, so I'm running out of breath. So I'm gonna spend about another 14, 15 more minutes on this. All right. So real quick, let's look up Black existentialism, right? Black existentialism. As a matter of fact, let's look up the word. What is existentialism? Okay, so existentialism is a philosophical theory or approach which the existence of the individual persons as a free and responsible agent determining their own development through acts of the will. That's what existentialism means. A philosophical theory or approach which emphasizes the existence of the individual person as a free and responsible agent determining their own development through acts of the will. All right, that's the definition. All right, so let's look up what Black existentialism is. Black existentialism or Africana critical theory is a school of thought that critiques domination and affirms the empowerment of Black people in the world, although it shares a word with existentialism and that philosophies concerned with existence and meaning in life. It is predicated on the liberation of all Black people in the world from oppression. It may also be seen as method which allows one to read works by African American writers such as W.E.B. Du Bois, James Baldwin, and Ralph Ellison in existentialism frame. Lewis Gordon argues that Black existentialism is not only existential philosophy produced by Black philosophers, but it's also thought that addresses the intersection of problems of existing in Black contexts. All right. So here it is. Black existential philosophy is a species of Africana philosophy and Black philosophical thought. Africana philosophy is a form of philosophy emerged out of the critical thought of African diaspora. So Black philosophical thought pertains to the idea emerging from Black designated people such as people including, for example, Australian Aboriginal people who often refer to themselves as Black. There is thus also work in Black existential philosophy from Australia, such as those organized through forums and articles by Danielle Davis in Oudougrou unit of Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia. Okay. So then it goes on to say the first African American to earn a doctorate from Harvard University earned his degree in sociology. However, the work of W.E.B. Du Bois have been honored in the canon of African American philosophy. Du Bois' notion of double consciousness has been revisited by many scholars as a notion derived in existentialism. Du Bois addresses several problems germane to Black existential philosophy. He raised the question of Black suffering as a philosophical problem. Was there meaning behind being suffering? Such suffering. He also observed that Black people were often studied and addressed in public discussions as problems of the modern world instead of as people facing problems raised by modern life. Black people, he argued, often face double standards in their efforts to achieve equality in the wake of enslavement, colonialism, and racial apartheid. This double standard led, he argued, to two-ness of double consciousness. The two-ness was the experience of being Black in America, where the two were treated as contradictory. Double consciousness followed in two forms. The first was of the experience of being seen from the perspective of white supremacy and anti-Black racism. It was from the perspective of seeing themselves as lowly and inferior. The second, however, as Paget Henry argues, involves seeing the contradiction of a system that in effect blames the victim. That form of double consciousness involves seeing the injustice of a social system that limits possibilities for social groups and creates advantages for others while expecting both to perform equally. The Black people were imprisoned for challenging the injustice of a social system born on the memorable phrase, all men are created equal. Is a case in point in the subsequent criticism of whether men meant women too, pushes this point further, as Frederick Douglass, Anna Julia Cooper, and other earlier 19th century Black critical thinkers contended. Du Bois also theorized the importance of Black music, especially the spirituals, and through them raised the question of the inner life of Black people, which he referred to as their soul, which in his discussion of double consciousness became souls. Du Bois also raised the problem of history in the study of Black existence. Let me highlight it for you guys. Okay. He knows that double standards affect how history is told, and that the misrepresentation of history as an apology for white supremacy and colonialism led to degradation of Black people as passive objects of history instead of makers of history. This occlusion depended on denying the struggles for freedom waged by Black people in the effort to expand the reach of freedom in the modern world. Okay. And then it also goes on down here where it says a danger of Black suffering is that it could lead to a sense of pointlessness of Black existence and a lack of self-worth. Cornel West has addressed the problem of Black nihilism. Nihilism, which is a Latin term, refers to a number of different views in philosophy, all of which express some form of philosophical pessimism. Different forms of nihilism holds various that human values are baseless and that life is meaningless, that knowledge is impossible, or that some set of entity does not exist. Okay, so all right, so Cornel West addressed the concept about Black nihilism, right? And what he said the proper starting point for the crucial debate about the prospects of Black America is an examination of the nihilism that increasingly pervades Black community. Nihilism is to be understood here not as a philosophic doctrine that there are no rational grounds for legitimate standards or authority. It is far more the lived experience of coping with a life of horrifying meaninglessness, hopelessness, and most important, lovelessness. The frightening result is a numbering detachment from others and a self-destructive disposition towards the world. Life without meaning, hope, and love breeds a cold-hearted, mean-spirit outlook that destroys both the individual and others. Okay, so and right here, this is in Wikipedia. So look up Black existentialism, right? Black existentialism in Wikipedia, and you'll be able to find out more information, right? Okay, so let's also look at another article real fast that deals with Black existentialism, extending the discourse on meaning and existence. So real quick, this article right here, okay, is written by Linwood G. Vernon, Lisa A. Wines, Tamiko Lindberger, True Love, Michael D. Hannon, Natasha Howard, and Isaac Burt. Okay. All right, so what I'm gonna do is let's look at the first paragraph where it says no. Let's look at it right here. Right here seems like a good one. This is a good paragraph to read from. I'm gonna highlight this. Ooh, there we go. Oh goodness. Okay, there we go. All right. Black existentialism acknowledges the inequity of access for all and challenges the ism that prior to agency there must first be liberation. Liberation can be seen as a precursor necessary foundation to accessing agency, which also has not been historically afforded to Black people. From a humanistic perspective, Black existentialism is the lens through which one can begin to see where inequity, racialization, and marginalization are situated as Black people search for experience agency in the world. This is because Black existentialism has roots in advocacy, social justice, and radicalism as tenets. All right. And then that's where the source of information come from. M. Brooks, Personal Communication, July 7th of 2016. As a school of thought, Black existentialism has emerged out of the hardships that were experienced by people of color from many corners of the world, France, Haiti, and Algeria, who were subject to colonization, marginalization, and inequity. Black existentialism has potential to move beyond traditional counseling, philosophy, and theory, which has been criticized for ignoring the unique experience of Black individuals. In the addition, in addition to reestablishing Black existentialism within the counseling literature, we illuminate the underlying differences between Black existentialism and European existentialism. We provide insight into how Black existentialism as a philosophy fosters thoughts and dialogue to investigate the relationship between Black existentialism and humanistic thought. In this manner, we hope to challenge and engage further scholarship that explores the connection between humanism and the promotion of a meaningful Black existing. At the same time, we want to avoid a myopic, conclusive discussion that would be reductionist and dishonor the experiences of those reported to be equal citizens, yet not treated in that manner. Now, I'm gonna read this little second paragraph right here, and then I'm gonna stop. All right. So it says Black existentialism demands an exploration of the phenomenological world and engenders a deconstruction of the misconception of society. One misconception is that Black people share the same lived experiences. At the heart of this narrative is a central element interweaving the human stories and histories of Black collective struggles to define identity and finding meaning in life. For the European existentialist, the human being is born, therefore immediately exists, and subsequently chooses direction in life meaning. Life creating meaning of self through experience. As a result, self definition inherently derived through choices. These basic premises fail to consider the influence and dynamic of social construction, such as marginalization, racialization, on the individual's developmental understanding of self and others. Black existentialism emerged in reaction to the unrealized edits and unrealized edits of universal agency, meaning making, and is thus cultivated on the momentum of advocacy, social justice, and radicalism. So that's the article, right? Which is called Black Existentialism, extending the discourse on meaning and existence. All right, so you can check that article out for yourself. Okay, and so there's many other hosts of information. Let's see what else I can look at real fast. Okay, so that's hold on. Let's go down to here real quick. So there's a book, all right, there's a PDF I want to show y'all. This PDF is called A Companion to African American Philosophy. All right, and it was written by Tommy L. Lott and John P. Pittman. So that's the PDF right here. And so let's look at the introduction of this PDF. All right, so okay, so the introduction goes like this. Often the question, what is African American philosophy, is understood to demand evidence of a traditional philosophic Black thought in America. Many classic literary, social, and political texts representing the history of African American thought are concerned with questions regarding rights, equality, and justice. It is no surprise to find that a lot of these writings have been greatly influenced by European American philosophy. Some of the authors in part one address questions regarding the limitation inherent in applying European ideas to the situation of African Americans, while other critically assesses the major schools of thoughts within the African American tradition so constituted. All right. So you got the names out here. They got Cornel West, Lewis Gordon, and Paget Henry. So let's see. Yeah, so it goes in talk about each individual. So let's give an excerpt of chapter 1 real fast. Okay, let's look at the excerpt of chapter 1. Let's look at all right, so let's look at chapter 1, the excerpt. So chapter 1 of this book deals with the philosophy and the Afro-American experience with Cornel West. Okay, so it says, how does philosophy relate to the Afro-American experience? This question arises primarily because of an antipathy to the historical character of contemporary philosophy and the paucity of eliminating the diachronic studies of the Afro-American experience. I would try to show that certain philosophical techniques derived from a particular conception of philosophy can contribute to our understanding of the Afro-American experience. For a lack of a better name, I shall call the application of these techniques to this experience Afro-American philosophy. I would examine historical sources of these techniques and explore the way in which they underscore the visibility of an Afro-American philosophy. Finally, I would attempt to show what results such a philosophy should yield. Okay, so it says the philosophical techniques requested for an Afro-American philosophy must be derived from a liquid and credible conception of philosophy. The search for such a conception requires us to engage in meta-philosophical discourse and philosophical reflection on philosophy. The most impressive meta-philosophical formulation of our age, which expressed displeasure with the historical character of modern philosophy, are those of Martin Heidegger, the later Wayne Einstein, and John Dewey. Although the interest and reflection of these thinkers widely diverge, they point to one ideal essential for an African American philosophy: a critical attitude towards the Artesian philosophical worldview. The Cartesian, the Cartesian Wallenstein-Schwann is the foundation of modern philosophy. Briefly, the Cartesian perspective categorically distinguishes Homo sapien from the rest of the animal kingdom, posits the process of knowing as quantitatively different from all other human activities, claims mental entities such as beliefs, desire, and intentions are separate from yet related to physical action, and conceive language and thoughts as system of representation which somehow correspond the world. The Cartesian picture, the first modern philosophical portraits, presents the perennial conundrums of contemporary philosophy, namely the metaphysical nature of man, necessary truth, freedom of the will, the mind body schism, and the relation between ideas and objects, words and things. Despite Gallian attempts to dissolve these problems into psychology, the Cartesian tradition persists into the 20th century. So that's just an idea of, that's the first chapter of that book. Again, if you want to look up the information yourself, it's called A Companion to African American Philosophy. All right. And it's written by Tommy L. Lotz and John P. Pittman. And so with that being said, I'm gonna stop right there, and I'm gonna continue with the part 2. And the part 2 is gonna be dealing with Lucius Outlaw Africana. All right, so I'm gonna deal with the part 2 of the Africana philosophy, and we're gonna go more into Black existentialism. All right, but in the meantime, right, I will give some recommendation of people who to look into. Look into Frantz Fanon's work, also W.E.B. Du Bois, because he goes into a lot of that. And also look at Dr. Edwin Nichols. Dr. Edwin Nichols, he deals with psychology, but he also can fall into this category of someone who deals with Africana philosophy as well. So he really gets into the concept of the dichotomous logic. The dichotomous logic is dealing with the logic of those of African descendant and those of the European descendant. He goes in that detail and explains about that. As a matter of fact, let me play a little bit of his video, Dr. Edwin Nichols. One moment. All right, so I'm gonna play a video by Dr. Edwin Nichols. He go into the essayiological journey of the African Americans, but he talks a little bit about the philosophical differences, right? The philosophical aspect of cultural differences. So I'm gonna play a little bit of his video. I'm gonna play probably about 5 minutes of it, or yeah, about 5 or 6 minutes. Okay, so let's go ahead, play the video.
Good evening.
Okay, so I'm gonna play a little bit of his video. This one is an old video that he did, but it's still prevalent to this day. Oops. Hold on.
Good evening. Good evening. How are you? All right. I want to thank you very much for inviting me to be with you to share concepts and ideas. I don't know, is the voice can you hear me in the back at all? It needs to be louder. Well, they're working on that. All right, let's see how is that better. Okay, How's that? Is that better? Okay. What I want to do today is I want to share some concepts and ideas with you. And so I want you to take this piece of paper that says, that's going to give a lot of feedback or no? Okay. Leave this one on too. Okay, all right. Take philosophical aspects of cultural difference. This is going to be our worksheet for tonight. In the United States, we have people that are from different ethnic groups. That's the first column. People from the different ethnic groups come from Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Native American. The concept of worldview means people who had a single historical event that changed everything for them. They were forced to speak a different language and forced to convert to a different religion. Hispanics comprise a collective of people who share a common world view. They were subjected to colonial Spain, they were forced to speak Spanish, and forced to convert to Catholicism. To be Hispanic is not race specific. You can be white, Hispanic, black, Hispanic, Native American Hispanic. You can be Jose Wong and still be what? Yes. All right. Now, the other part of this is to be Hispanic is not contingent upon nationality. You can be Hispanic and come from Argentina, or from Chile, or from Nicaragua, Cuba, or Texas, or New York. But if your history says you were subject to colonial Spain, forced to speak Spanish, forced to convert to Catholicism, then you are by that definition sharing a common worldview and you are Hispanic. Now, Hispanic is also a political designation, and you need to be clear on that too. You see, everything has an overt statement and a covert agenda. And in order to survive, you have to listen to the covert statement and be very clear that there is a covert agenda. See, there's the overt statement, you're on top, that's what's said. But what is actually being done is the covert agenda to be carried out. So while you say, well, we want to know who these people are, you have to ask yourself, why do they want to know? They didn't want to know before. If you were Mexican American, you were classified as white by the Treaty of Guadalupe. Okay? But you weren't treated as white. But in Texas, when it got to be 1/3 black people voting, 1/3 white voting, then the Mexican American vote was very important because it could shift the balance. So you need to know how many they were, where they were, how much money they made, and welcome to the Republican Party. Okay? So what I'm saying with you, it is a device by which we know the economic status and we know the political status of a group of people that are classified with this nomenclature. Now the next 3 columns are classical philosophical disciplines. The first one is axiology. Please say it. Axiology is the study of values. Values. Axiology is the study of what? Good. The next subject is epistemology. Say it. Okay. Epistemology asks the question, how do you know knowledge? How do you know knowledge? How do you know things? That's epistemology. Logic asks the question, how do you reason? Now, since you read the materials and I'm a psychologist, the question is, why don't I talk about the psychological aspects of cultural difference rather than the philosophical? So you want to be clear on that. When we use our own disciplines, our focus is too narrow. So what we want to do is we want to expand, and the mother science is philosophy. Now, if I just use my discipline, psychology, I'm a psychologist. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm a psychoanalyst with advanced training in Zurich, Switzerland. So you see, my vision of the world is very narrowly focused. Now, of course, since I'm the analyst, what does that make all of you? Which all patient doesn't sit and treat therapy. Yes, okay. I said it's too narrowly focused. Now let's try it differently. Let's see what happens if somebody's an accountant, auditor, tax auditor for the IRS. What does that make all of you? Okay. Now you see that those visions are too narrowly focused because that's how you get isms, and that's how you get I am the good and you're the aberration from. I'm the correct, you're the wrong, I'm the good, you're the bad. Those are stereotypes. And that's how it's done when we're too narrowly focused with our own discipline. Now, what I want to do is I want to use the mother science. So now let's take what does mother science force us to do? It forces us to examine essences, and how does that work? Well, I have a silly game that I devise, and if you play that, it will be very clear. It has 3 steps. Step 1, you're to close your eyes. Step 2, I ask you to envision a specific noun. And step 3, I ask you to open your eyes and we discuss it. All right, step 1, close your eyes. Now your eyes are open, you're paranoid. Okay? Step 2, envision a chair. A chair. Perhaps even your favorite chair. Step 3, open your eyes. Now, if we had taken a Polaroid snapshot of what each person had seen, all of them would be gone. Yet we collected all of them and gave them to any person in the room. Each of you would be able to identify each of the pictures as a what? How is that possible? Because you have understood the essence of chairness and you would never confuse it with a what? Table. You see? So what I'm getting at is what are those very essential factors for difference? And I'm using the mother science philosophy to try to ascertain them. My belief system says that for Europeans, the highest value for them is in subject, object, member, object. So the important factor then is the external, the object. That's the highest value. Now, when you make a statement like that, you need some data to back it up. So let's look for some epidemiographic data that corroborates that construct. If a person says that their highest value is in the object, then you can understand what happened in 1929 when there was a crash. Many people lost everything, but significant numbers of white males did what? Yes, because they had lost that which for them was the object of highest value. What happened in 1970? There was an automotive industry that said, if you have worked for us for 30 years or more, effective the 1st of July, you retire. These were 50-year-old men, and for the first time in their lives, they would be without a job. But they had homes paid for, cars paid for, retirement benefits, health benefits, union benefits, everything you can imagine. But after the 1st of July, they would not have a job. So within 6 months after they were in forced retirement, significant numbers of white males simply began to die. We didn't understand why they were dying. I was working with the National Institute.
Okay. Okay, so that's Dr. Edwin Nichols. So again, oh shoot, I ain't got my mic. Okay, that's again, that's Dr. Edwin Nichols. So check him out. I will put up the name of the list of people that you should check out when it comes to deal with Africana philosophy, and I will continue this part 2 later on. So, you know, because I have to get into my duties, my daily routine. So yeah, you know how that goes, doing your daily routine. You know what I mean? So, anyways, I appreciate you guys watching. I've been on this video almost 2 hours. Yeah. But you guys have a wonderful day. Please be safe out there. Take it easy on yourself. And may peace and power elevation be to you all. And if you are watching from my YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe. If you are watching from Facebook, make sure you share the video. And if you like what I'm doing and you want to support me, you can go ahead and check me out right here on the Cash App. You know, you can go ahead and support my Cash App. But other than that, please be safe while we in the midst of this crisis, while we dealing with this pandemic. When they figure out what's going on, please make sure you safe. Make sure your family is safe. If the kids are in school, make sure they're safe, and keep them protected at all costs. All right. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys for watching, and until next time, peace. All right.